Olá, pessoal! A gente está aqui hoje com o imenso prazer de receber a doutora Maya Rockeymoore Cummings. A Maya é norte-americana, possui doutorado em Ciências Políticas, com ênfase em políticas públicas. A partir do seu conhecimento acadêmico e profissional, fundou e hoje é presidente e CEO da Global Policy Solutions, uma empresa dedicada a ajudar organizações comunitárias, filantrópicas, acadêmicas, governamentais e corporativas a alcançar objetivos estratégicos por meio da construção de coalizões, análise e pesquisa de políticas públicas. Palestrante e autora renomada, suas áreas de atuação incluem saúde, segurança social, segurança econômica, educação, que é o nosso caso, tecnologia, questões femininas e participação cívica juvenil. Autora do livro The Political Action Handbook, A How-to Guide for the Hip Hop Generation, e de outros tantos artigos e contribuições. Citada extensivamente em publicações como no jornal The Washington Post e New York Times, entre outras mídias. A doutora Rockeymoore Cummings já atuou como presidente do Partido Democrata de Maryland, vice-presidente de pesquisa e programas na Black Caucus Foundation, bolsista residente sênior na National Urban League, chefe de gabinete do ex-deputado Charles Hangel, entre outras posições, recebedora de muitos prêmios, incluindo a Bolsa Henry Crowe do Aspen Institute. Que currículo! Que história! A gente está muito feliz de receber a Maya aqui.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay.
I look forward to having this conversation today and with the Astacio family.
Yeah. Thank you. Vou apresentar também aqui o Gabriel Valadares, que está com a gente, lá do time de gente, e a Renata Tasca, de marketing. A gente vai conduzir essa conversa para vocês. E a ideia é a gente falar um pouco aqui sobre educação, sobre inclusão, sobre a importância desses temas, não só na nossa instituição, mas para a sociedade como um todo, e trazer um pouco da experiência da doutora Maya, em como ela vê todas essas questões aí interligadas com o nosso tema, que é a própria questão da educação. Can you talk a little bit about your history, your work history, your life like a student? Yeah.
Absolutely. I always start my story by telling who I am.
Yeah.
I am the fourth generation from slavery in the United States of America. My great-grandparents were actually born into a system of servitude, slavery in the United States of America. And so, my grandparents then, of course, went into a system that they called Jim Crow. It was a system of segregation where people who had Black and brown skin were not allowed to interact with white people in America. My parents, their entire educational lives in terms of their K through 12 basic education, elementary, middle school, high school, was in a segregated education system in the United States where Black kids could not attend schools with kids with lighter skin, white skin. And so I am the first generation in my family to actually attend school and live in communities with white people. And that is because of public policy. It is because of activism by many people we call the civil rights movement in the United States. Here in Brazil, you call it the Black movement. People who have stood up for their rights, who have pushed government to actually get rid of unfair laws, who have pushed government to make sure that affirmative action policies and other fair policies were in place so that everyone, regardless of background, regardless of skin color, regardless of gender, regardless of nationality, has an opportunity to become the best that they can be in life, has an opportunity to access quality education, has an opportunity to rise to become the highest that they can be. And so I am a product of a family who had to fight to become and to basically make sure that subsequent generations had opportunity. And I feel it's my responsibility to make sure that I carry that forward and do the same to make sure that generations that come behind me continue to thrive.
Yeah. You talk about the fourth generation and past the slavery. And in your experience, how do you see the question about the importance of education in this break with this history that's so fresh in our lives?
So my grandparents viewed family, faith, and education and hard work as the keys to how you actually propel yourselves forward generationally. And so my parents picked that up, and they basically, even though they had limited opportunities because the entirety of the education system was not available to them, they still did everything that they could to learn, to get educated, to know, their basic education in terms of their math and their reading skills, to develop their minds. They had parents who understood that education was going to be the key to their opportunities in life, and that despite the fact that society was structured in a way that was unfair to them, that it was only going to be through education that they could catapult themselves over the barriers so that they could be the best that they could be. And then they taught us the same thing. So my sister, my brother, and I, we pursued education for everything that we had. My sister is a medical doctor. My brother also attended school to get his PhD. He is a former city councilman in the town that he lives in, and he's also a school teacher. And of course, I have my PhD in political science. I am a professor. I am a business owner. I am a speaker. I am an author. I am a strategist. I am an activist. I do a lot. I do a lot of television too in the United States. And I view it as my role to educate not just students in a classroom, but the public and the world.
Oh, perfect.
So recently here at Stassi, we launched a course focused on structural sexism. It's 100% online, 100% free, and we aim on educating our students and society as a whole. In this material, we have a whole section dedicated to intersectionality and the relevance of creating public policies that take into account all layers of diversity. In your TED Talk, Why We Need an Inclusion Revolution, you express your belief in a democracy where everyone feels included. So I would like to hear from you, as a Black woman, how public policies can be developed, considering the perspective of intersectionality, to ensure that the needs and realities of all social groups are taken into account fairly.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Heknata. We have a system in the United States, and I believe in many countries around the world, where gender is also structurally discrimination. Women particularly experience structural discrimination. There has been a history of seeing women as second-class citizens, of men actually perpetuating what we call patriarchy, where they basically see themselves as the dominant force and women as not having full human agency, that they are actually basically subservient to men and essentially in a childlike role. And the way that we now continue to see, historically, this is played out because women have been kept from getting full education, including a university education. Women have been told that their proper position is having babies in a house and taking care of a household and cleaning a house, And so, we are not just trying to overcome a history of racism, but we're also trying to overcome a history of, is it sexismo? Sexism, where women have been excluded from opportunities in society. So in the context of the United States, this meant that when the civil rights movement came along, there was also a companion women's rights movement. They took the notes from the Blacks who decided that they were going to fight the system. And women also rose up to say, we need opportunity too. So basically, they confronted government and public policy to change. And so we have civil rights laws that now include Blacks, women, transgender people, people who have a sexuality other than heterosexism. And so with that, there has been a whole revolution in terms of rights, recognizing that because of the history that limits opportunities, that because of that history of exclusion, now is the time for us to fully embrace as a society inclusion in all of its forms. Now, intersectionality is incredibly important because the unfairness of the historical and to be frank, we still experience this discrimination in all of our societies. But, just imagine that if you are a Black woman who is poor, who might be, maybe she's gay, I don't know, or lesbian, all of these historical forms of discrimination falling into one body, one person, that she is experiencing discrimination upon discrimination upon discrimination. Because let's be frank, class is also a form of discrimination. If you don't have money in our society, our society is structured, all of our societies are capitalistic, is structured to make sure that you are at the bottom of everything. And that is also unfair. And it exists despite the fact that you might be brilliant, that you have talent, that you have, innate abilities that mean that you should have every opportunity to develop yourself. And yet, because of these hard barriers in our society, they force you down and they don't recognize your talent and they don't allow you to fully develop. And so these movements for inclusion are about breaking every single one of those barriers. As a society, it makes sense that we try to remove these barriers so that we can all benefit from the intelligence and the talent that is innate in all of us. When we don't allow people to develop to their fullest extent, our entire society suffers because we are not benefiting from the contributions. And by the way, when people are fully developed, they make a lot of money. They can pay taxes. They can buy cars. They can buy houses. Why don't we want everybody to be able to be great taxpayers? Why don't we want everybody to be able to give society all of their talent and make sure that we're the best countries that we can be? So this is in the interest, ESG, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's in the interest not of just individuals, but of society at large.
That's amazing. So inspiring. Thank you.
In this way, we have a lot of studies that we turn off diversity for companies. This is not only a question about society in the social way, but it's an economic way too, like you said. For companies, that is it's good for a company, it's good for society, it's good for people. Diversity is not a issue for us discuss inside the social movements. We need to discuss diversity at companies like we do here. Is so important. Listen this for you because it's important for us too.
It's absolutely important, but not only is it important from what you just said, the research actually proves what you just said.
Yeah.
The research actually shows that when companies are more diverse, when they include women, when they include people of Black and brown people, when they include people who have diverse backgrounds, that the entire company benefits. That the research shows that companies that have this kind of diversity and inclusion do better in the marketplace. And it's because they have a diversity of views that are compatible with their customer base. They're not making as many mistakes, developing products and services that don't necessarily fit with, all of the people who could potentially be their customers. When you have that kind of internal insight, you're better able to serve a very diverse society. Companies that actually do not embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion have huge blind spots.
Yeah.
And these blind spots actually prevent them from maximizing their profit. They prevent them from recognizing new market opportunities. They prevent them from basically becoming the best company that they could possibly be, just like society. And so it is very important for companies to actually embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. for that reason. They could be larger, better, more responsive, and more compatible with their customer base.
3 years ago on TEDx, you were talking about how we were all being attacked from within by forces that have the intention of dividing us, right? And you could have us give up on the very notion of a democracy. However, you concluded by saying that we were at our zero moment. We could either crash as a society or we could soar. So from the events that happened the last few years, what direction do you think the society went?
Thank you for that very important question, because I don't think that any of us appreciate democracy and what it does for us. And many times I think that many of us don't travel the world much. And so we don't actually have an appreciation for democracy because we don't see the opposite, autocracy. Those countries that don't allow people to live in freedom, that control and repress everything that people do, that don't allow them to have a say in how their government is run. Those autocracies, also known as dictatorships or oligarchies, where only the uber rich or people who are from certain families historically get to have a say in how the country is run. Those are repressive societies that are not designed to allow for the fullest expression and development of humanity. And so democracy is important because it is only through democracy that the Black movement here in Brazil was able to say, we need inclusive society. It is only through democracy that in the United States, the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement, people were able, like you and me, were able to push to make sure that our society is changed. In autocracies, that's not possible. Yeah. So that means that we have to appreciate and value democracy as much as we appreciate and value, our freedom. And it's almost synonymous. So in the United States, I would say that society decided that they were interested in preserving and defending democracy. And so they're trying to soar. There are forces at work in the United States that are trying to take us back 100 years. They want us to go back to a world where women don't have opportunities in the workforce. They want us to go back to a world where Black and brown people are excluded from society and are at the bottom of society. They want us to go back to a world where people of different sexual preferences or gender identities do not have opportunity. And society in the United States is making the decision that we want to move forward. It is time for us to walk into a future hand in hand in order to make sure that all of us have the best opportunities. Now, the thing about democracy is that you can never get tired and you can never slack off. Because the second that you think that you've won, the opposite force, they step up and they say, no, we're going to come out en masse and we're going to make a different choice. And that means that it requires all of us to participate. It's not okay to just sit in an armchair on the sideline and watch it on television. You have to participate because your voice matters in a democracy. Your vote matters. And so, maybe you didn't come up and grow up in a family who voted. Maybe you didn't grow up in a family that didn't think that politics or that thought that politics was unimportant or they didn't think it was important. It's now time for you to recognize it is all of our responsibility, every single one of us, to participate in our democracy by making sure that we become educated about the choices, become educated about the policies, and make the right choices at the polls when you go to vote. And take your kids, because you want your kids to see you voting so that they can have the value of voting and understand the role that they will have to play in terms of making sure that we have a diverse and inclusive democracy.
Have you been in Salvador, which is the largest Black capital outside of Africa? I lived there for a few months, like I said to you, and the African influence is very evident. in all aspects of daily life, from food and the way that the people accept the African religions. When we think about inclusion and belonging, how do you see the relationship of this process with the local culture and occupation of territory, and the difference between the Eurasian movements in United States and here in Brazil? Like the people see this from a cultural view of racial issues.
So, first of all, you should know that I landed in the country, and the first trip I took literally, as soon as I got off the plane, I went to Bahia. I went to Salvador. And I feel just a sense of affinity with the region of the country, with the northeastern region of Brazil, because of that history of slavery. I've already told you, we're all connected. The fact of the matter is that the transatlantic slave trade, the first stop was here in Brazil, and then they went up, the Latin Americas to the Caribbean, and then up to the United States. And so we're all a part of this mass diaspora that was displaced as a result of a business decision, the decision to actually traffic in human beings. And now, several centuries later, we all find ourselves in these different circumstances. But the fact of the matter is the treatment is the same wherever you go. And that is why we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion now in the United States, in Colombia, here in Brazil, and, in places throughout the diaspora where people of African descent, the Afro-descendants, have landed, because there is something called white nationalism, white supremacy, and it's global. It is an attitude, it is an ideology, that creates values based on human beings and their skin color. And at the top of that hierarchy are people of white skin, and at the very bottom of that hierarchy are people of black skin, and then there's every level in between. And we are fighting that system, but it also actually connects to the culturalism of this. And this is how. You see your beautiful hair? It's gorgeous. I wanted to tell myself that, your hair is gorgeous. But for example, in the United States, that if you wanted to work for a company, you were expected not to wear braids. You were expected to straighten your hair with chemicals and look like a white person if you wanted to actually have opportunity. There was active discrimination against women who wore their natural kinky hair in an afro or in braids. And so now what you have in the United States is a movement of people, women, black women particularly, who are pushing government at the state, local, and federal level to basically outlaw discrimination based on hairstyle, based on how you wear your hair, because the way that it worked is that black hairstyles and black textured hair was discriminated against. It's called the Crown Act, and it's passing in states across the country. And so, the fact of the matter is that we have different cultural heritages. And so we must be very appreciative of these differences because, that's what makes us beautiful. Our diversity makes us beautiful. And when we try to actually force people to, adhere to a same standard, whether that's straight hair or, not being able to wear, your colorful, clothing that might be, historically connected to your heritage, that we are doing a disservice to our history, and we're doing a disservice to people who come from historically marginalized heritages.
So, before I ask this question, I got to give you some context. Last year, I was one of the 11 trainees at Yduqs, and this program was 100% exclusive to Black people, which was great, right? And I have always been an activist when it comes to fight against racism and fight for equality. And I've always been very clear about my positioning. So the question is, how much do you think is important when you have young people fighting for the right causes and making themselves heard?
It's extremely important. Almost every major movement that has changed society have been led by young people. In the United States, the civil rights movement was led by young people. The Black Lives Matter movement was led by young people. I'm assuming here in Brazil, the Black movement, maybe the women's movement, were led by young people. And it's because there's a reason for that. Young people are not yet up in society where they're comfortable and they feel like they have a lot to lose because, they're connected to jobs and, they're still at the cusp where their idealism leads. And it's important that we not punish them for this because it is through their passion, it is through their advocacy that we get societal change. But we need young people to be able to, have the kind of education that allows them to open their eyes to see what's not right so that they can make the right kinds of advocacy to actually change things for the better. I think it's incredibly important for young people to see themselves, regardless of whether they've got a good job or not, that they see themselves as important change agents in society. Now, as I mentioned earlier, voting and doing the formal things is incredibly important for democracy in terms of making sure we maintain our democracy, making sure we're voting for the right people and that those people stand for the right kinds of policies that are diverse and inclusive. But sometimes the system needs a shock. Sometimes, the system you need to actually push the system from outside. Not just from voting, but from protest. And protest should be seen as a very legitimate form of political expression, too. Because, the women in the United States, at least, the women's rights movement and the Black movement, none of that came from just voting. A lot of it came from taking to the streets to say that this is not right, to say we deserve better. And so it's the voices of young people who have traditionally led those kinds of movements, and that's incredibly important.
Perfect.
It's amazing. Sorry, you're gonna
go.
Yeah, and it's amazing to hear you say that because when you look at our students, in majority they are young people. They're more than 50% women. They're more than 50% people who consider themselves Black, and they're 70% people. The first one in the family have their degrees. So you see the class they come from. So they really represent everything we're talking here. They're about intersectionality. They're about this power of changing, and I think educating them, talking to them is just like giving them sources and ways to put themselves out there and really be the change. I think that's not a question we had here, but I think something we're talking about, it's maybe what it's missing in them. It's a little bit of self-esteem to understand that they are really the change we need, or that they have everything we need them to make something powerful. So I would like to hear about self-esteem when you're so young and not really when you don't consider yourself like allowing at some place. Did it make my sense? Did it make sense? Yeah.
So it is so easy for you, young people, to think that your voice doesn't matter. You think that you're alone and that, the things that you think don't matter. When the reality is that your voice is so incredibly powerful and it is so incredibly important. And when you join with other people who think the same way and you kind of amass, a group of people to basically push for change, you can move mountains. You can change society for the better, and you can improve your lives and that of your family members and friends in the process. So young people, I don't want you to ever think that your voice doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. Just for example, in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement, you might have heard about it here in Brazil. But it was people like you, young people. They may or may not have been in college, by the way. young people who decided we're not going to let police just kill us. We're not going to let police just take us out on street corners just because we have black and brown skin. That we're going to actually stand up and fight for our rights. We're going to take to the streets to say, this is not right. And guess what? Their voices were heard all around the world, not just in the United States of America, but all around the world, especially after the George Floyd murder happened. And so that means that, young people, when you discount the value of your voice, you're giving away your power. When you think that what you have to say doesn't matter, you're giving away your power. When you in your own mind say, oh, well, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe, I don't have the courage to stand up or to speak out, you're giving away your power. I want you to know this. It is important that we talk about this. Your mind plays tricks on you. It can play tricks on you. It's played tricks on me in the past, I remember a time in my life where I felt like what I had to say did not matter. And rather than say it, I just held back and went on about my business. When it turns out that if I would have actually not let myself, I call it the head fake, where you let your mind basically talk you out of doing something. When I could have been helped to transform things for the better if I would have spoken out and organized other people to stand with me. This also works in terms of the educational experience and also the employment experience. When we arrive in a new situation, any new situation, whether it's a new community or a new school or a new job, and we're all full of self-doubt. We don't know if we'll fit in. We don't know if, we have the education that it takes to do well. We feel deeply insecure. I have felt insecure in the past. You won't believe it now, but, I used to have an insecurity about speaking publicly, public speaking. But, what you have to do is realize that that's the head fake. That is the voice in your head that's trying to talk you out of being the best that you can be. When you experience the head fake, your job is to push through it. It's to suppress those voices, those negative voices in your mind that are trying to tell you don't fit in or you don't have what it takes. It's to suppress that and recognize that you would not be there if it weren't in your purpose to be there. You've got to recognize that you've got to take advantage of the opportunity you've been given. Stick with it. Do not give up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you.
one thing that you said that there is, I totally, I believe nowadays, but back in college, I thought my voice was not important, especially because the majority of the people, they do not agree with me. So if I say something that goes against what they say, I'm gonna feel isolated. They're gonna judge me. And for some time, I was okay. I'm gonna keep my opinions to myself, and that I'm gonna just pass through those things. And I thought this was the best way that I could deal with things. And nowadays, I'm like, if I hadn't changed that, look, all of the things that I did, if I hadn't spoke about it, if I haven't discussed about it. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
So that actually brings us to the thing of courage. Because, we always feel like we should be a part of the crowd. That, if we stand out in any way, oh my gosh, it's, we feel like, maybe we're vulnerable when we speak up. And I understand that there is fear in feeling like you could be a target. There is fear in having a different opinion and speaking it out about it because, you don't necessarily want to be excluded from your friends or your family members. But sometimes it's important to have the courage to speak out because especially when rights are at stake, when, the opportunity for people to actually, have their best lives and, those who are oppressed, if you can speak out and make sure that you can offer other people freedom by speaking, then you should have the courage to stand up and to express yourself. And if that means you're isolated for a time, who cares? I mean, listen, college was what, 4 years? 3 years, maybe? Yeah. I don't know. I've been in a situation where, when I was in college, I got into I was the president of my political science club. I was the head of my sorority's social action group. I was the editor of the newspaper. We, as Black students in an all-white state, we were being basically told that our votes didn't matter, and we were told not to. We were being encouraged not to vote. And we decided that we were going to vote anyway in this all-white place. And then they came and they arrested 13 of our students. We were a Black college, an all-Black college, it was nice. But, we were targeted because they didn't want us to actually express our democratic right to vote. And as a political science student, I knew that this was unfair. And so I joined with the head of the Student Government Association. I mobilized my sorority girls. We got together with all these other groups on campus, and we organized a march from our Black college campus to the all-white county officials. And we got in front of that county building, and we basically, protested in front with our signs, and they basically not just released the students, but they also expunged their record. So it wouldn't ever show up that they had been arrested for voter fraud, they called it. But I view that as incredibly important, because if we allow them to get away with that, then that meant that in the future, they were going to continue to constrict the ability of students who look like me to actually have a voice in our democracy. That is unfair. That is fundamentally unfair when we cannot express ourselves and have our voices heard and how we're governed. And so, I viewed it as important to stand up, and I was able to convince others to come along. And so with that, we all have to have courage. Now, I could have been kicked out of school, because there was a time in the United States, even if we were at an all-Black college, that we could have been kicked out of school for that. But, sometimes you have to weigh the risks and the reward. And sometimes the bigger reward is doing the right thing.
So we know that in politics, as in many other job markets, the environment can be quite inhospitable for women. More when we are Black women. And in addition to being a minority, we still suffer from prejudice and greater difficulties. However, even with all the adversities, we did improve. I mean, we are getting in places that we never did. We have advanced in several areas. I would like to focus on the good perspective and know, in your opinion, what are the main advances we've had in recent years, and what do you expect for the future of women in politics?
So it did not help that Dilma did not do well here. But you should not disregard the fact that Dilma was, if I'm not correct, the first woman that you've ever had as president of the country of Brazil. That is huge. Do you know the United States of America has never had a woman president? That means that you're more advanced than the United States of America here in Brazil. Because gender discrimination is real, and it's experienced in many of these major societies, and you all have made serious advances with the election of a president. And the reason why it's huge is because you have now little girls all across, or young women all across the society who might have political aspirations. And because Dilma exists and she did what she did, they now see themselves as being able to rise to the highest levels of power. that if somebody like she could do it, that they can too. And maybe they can do it better. Same thing for Barack Obama in the United States, the first ever Black president of the United States. In our lifetimes, you all remember him, right? Now there are little Black children all over the United States, and maybe even around the world, who feel like, if he could do it, I can too. And so now we see the doors being kicked open, and young women, saying, well, maybe I'll get my start on the city council. Maybe I'll get my start, becoming a congressperson. Maybe I'll get my start by serving in the Lula administration in some role. And then maybe I'll rise in my party and get opportunities in the future. And I want women across this country, women, I want you to understand that you have the power, and it is perfectly within your right to strive for positions of power because in government, because you have a vision for how society should be run. You have a vision of what needs to be corrected, what bills need to be introduced, what laws need to be passed, because you know that it's going to be important for families to thrive, for individuals to rise, to become the best that they can be, and for entire communities to do well. And so I want you to know that public service is something that you can strive to achieve, and that you can not only get the position, but you can do well in that position.
Amazing. Thank you.
One thing that is that I would like to add is when we say things about fighting against gender discrimination, one thing that we do here in Yduqs, our company, is to teach and train, especially men, that they have something that they have to do there as well. For example, do you know that saying that it's not enough to not be a racist, you have to be anti-racist?
Absolutely.
I feel like some men, they feel they don't have responsibilities when we talking about gender discrimination, and they do. We are a part of this, and that's something that we work here a lot. Like, they have to assume their responsibility, and they have to assume that they have things to do. It's not enough to say things like, "Oh, I want to have women in my team. Oh, I like to have a woman vice president." They have to voice this as well.
So it's not enough you've got to be an anti-sexist too.
Perfect. Yeah.
And that means that, you've got to do the internal work to recognize when your biases might be showing up in the workplace. It's you can't expect the woman to go get coffee and to arrange for the food to be around the table. That's sexist. So you've got to be like, okay. I've been taught that that's a woman's role, but in the workplace, that is absolutely a sexist notion. So, men, yes, absolutely have a role to play, a huge role to play, because they're traditionally in the power structure. They're running the companies. They have the highest positions of power still in many of these institutions across the country. And that means that if we're going to truly be inclusive, men have to be willing to challenge the assumptions with which they've been raised, to recognize when the way that they think and behave towards women are holding women back in the workplace and across society. So I'm glad that you raised that, because it's the same thing with being an anti-racist, that white people have to recognize how they think and how they've been taught to behave contributes to racism. men have to do the same thing when it comes to sexism.
You talk a lot about this revolution by inclusion. So, like a last message, I would like you talk about this revolution and a final message to our students think about this path.
So my final message is that the inclusion revolution is real. It's happening in countries, particularly those countries where, that have had a history of oppressing women and Black and brown people. It's happening everywhere. And it's important that we keep the inclusion revolution going. But you can only keep it going if you actually have a revolution in your own mind. And so I want women, young people, Black and brown people across Brazil to recognize how you might be holding yourself back in your mind. And I want you to fight through that to recognize that you deserve all the opportunities that are out there. Don't ever think that you're undeserving, but you've got to do the work to basically push through your own internalized biases. It might be surprising to you, but we grow up in these societies and we internalize the racism, we internalize the sexism, we internalize the classism. And sometimes we think that we just don't belong because we've internalized those negative messages that society pushes at us. And so we've got to do the internal work to recognize that no, that is actually wrong. And yes, I am actually deserving of opportunity. I am actually deserving of living my best life. It is absolutely my right to be a full member of the society. It is my right to be able to access a job that allows me to care for my family well, not just getting by, but well. It is actually my right to get the best education I can get and to do the best that I can for my family, for myself, and for my community. And so, with that, the inclusion revolution is actually not just working to change society, but working to change your mind, to know that you have a right to exist and you have a right to thrive and you have a right to actually make change and to actually change the direction, not of just society now, but for your children and their children. So thank you. Thank you to every single one of you for having me here. I have so enjoyed this conversation.
We appreciate the time. That was
I
amazing.
so enjoyed this conversation. So what other questions do you have for me?
I have one, yes.
Okay.
When people our students are listening to you, and myself, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking, wow, such a role model. I mean, it's amazing to see women doing so much. I think our students can ask themselves, where do I begin? How do I get there? What can I do? So I think that would be nice to talk about a little bit about the beginning too.
There was one point in my life, I just mentioned I didn't start at Harvard. In fact, I've never been to Harvard. Well, no, I've been once to a 1-week summer program at Harvard, but I didn't go to Harvard. Everybody knows what Harvard is, right? It's considered the best school. And I went to a historically Black college, which is considered, if you're talking about the rankings of college in the United States of America, it's considered low. It's considered almost at the bottom of the barrel. And yet I have interacted with kings and queens and presidents of the United States and congressmen and celebrities. I have been on stages with billionaires. I have interacted with people from all walks of life. And I don't feel at all deficient. I feel like my education prepared me. That means that we have work to do. And that work is to take advantage of the education you're receiving. Take advantage of these lessons that you're getting. Make sure that you take advantage of every opportunity that Estacio might present to you. And it might mean that you might have to do something extra, but take advantage of it. Know that the people that you're going to school with, that these are the relationships that can, last for the rest of your professional life. And so make sure that you're cultivating these relationships because, sometimes it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And so with that, if Estacio has placement opportunities for employment, don't ignore that. Take advantage of it. They're here for a role. A reason. So make sure that you're taking full advantage of the opportunities that are before you, and seek out opportunities too. Ask people, get mentors. Make sure that you're doing your best to take full advantage of what the opportunities are, because that is what's going to catapult you to the next level of success and opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good role model. I'm talking about you, of course, because I think when we are talking about unprivileged people, you're also talking about unprivileged in a financial way, and they think they don't belong because they didn't go to elite university, right? Or because they didn't spend, I don't know, 10K a month to study somewhere. And I think it's very important for you to say this all out, because here in Brazil we have when it comes to financial, when it comes to money, it's not well distributed like around the whole population. So few people, they have a lot of access, they have a lot of opportunities, and I have to say that those that you have too many access, they don't
Share the wealth.
Yeah. But those ones that they have one access, they tend to go with 110% with courage and with determination. And I think this message is important for those who don't believe that what they're doing is worth, or in the future they might collect benefits from it. They will, right? They will succeed.
Yesterday I met with Luana Janot. I don't know if you all know her, but I went to her house and had lunch, and we talked. And she talked about, how I asked her, and she asked me, and I asked her the same question back. What are you most proud of? And she talked about how she was most proud of being a woman who was able to, a Black woman who was able to start a thriving, successful business that focuses on ESG and DEI. And that, that she's now able to employ so many people. And, she comes from a disadvantaged background, and, she's been able to rise to do what she's been able to do. And sometimes it's not taking on the world and changing the world. Sometimes it's employing people that you care about. And it's being able to, do what you can do within what you can do, and not necessarily, trying to change whole systems and structures. And I began to reflect on that, because I'm just like, I started a business, and we did well. And I continue to, do well economically. And that means that, you might start at the bottom of the barrel, but that doesn't mean that you can't rise to generate income and wealth. That doesn't mean you can't rise to actually not just be somebody who's employed, but to be the employer. So, we need to take the lid off of what we think is possible for our lives. We need to, and sometimes it's about being exposed to what others are doing. And sometimes it's about taking a serious assessment of what your talents are and your skills, because she had a business and, recognized that she's a storyteller. That is her talent. That is her skill. And fortunately, she was able to bring it here to Estacio. But, everybody has talent. Everybody has things that they're good at. What are you good at, and how can you monetize it in a way that can propel you to the next level of success? Now, I'm not unrealistic, because that means that sometimes you need capital, right?
Yeah.
In order to finance a business. I was fortunate because when I started my business, I had gone through a program for disadvantaged people to buy a home. And when I went through that program for disadvantaged people to buy a home, I didn't know that the home that I bought, which at the time was in a bad part of town, that they would start developing all around my house and it became a good part of town. And all of a sudden, the home that I bought became very valuable. And so I didn't even try to go to a bank. When I first started my business, I just took some of the value out of my home that had been built up and financed my own business. And so sometimes you have to be creative about how you actually get the capital you need, especially when you're faced with structural racism and structural sexism where the banks might not lend you, give you a loan because of your profile. But the fact of the matter is that if we truly, work at it, sometimes we can find ways around that.
Oh, I'm so glad at receive you here. And I have one more question. Okay, it's about ESG because it's my work, it's my passion. And recently, I read about some movements in the United States of politicians to block the growing of ESG,
Absolutely.
of ESG practice, and blocked some investors and put efforts in companies with ESG practices. So how do you see this? How do you see the importance of ESG issues on this? And when I saw politicians doing things against this, I thought, okay, we are in the right way because it's changing the panel of market. So for me, it's good. But how do you see this
Yes.
in the United States?
So I talked earlier, you asked me about the inclusion revolution. There are people, white people, who are afraid of the inclusion revolution. They were perfectly fine when they had a society that only served them.
Yeah.
And they don't want to share. And so they are organizing on the opposite side to push back. In the United States, they are now trying to organize to push back on ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fact, our last president, what was his name? What was his name?
Our last
president. And your last president. Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Donald Trump outlawed. He actually passed an executive order outlawing diversity, equity, and inclusion training. We cried out. We said that is terrible. And guess what happened to Donald Trump? We voted him out of office. And guess what? The first thing this new president, Biden, did, one of the first things he did was reinstitute. He reversed Donald Trump's decision to outlaw diversity, equity, and inclusion training.
Like here.
So Bolsonaro is another story. But I've read stories about Bolsonaro, and I know that he was like Donald Trump. And that is why we can never be comfortable. We can never just say, oh, it's just about my family and my job. We always have to pay attention to society because there are forces in society that do not want us to advance. Whether it's because you're black or brown or because you're a woman, they are organizing to take away rights. In the United States, they're organizing to take away women's rights around controlling their own bodies. Their right to choose whether they want to have a pregnancy. Their right to choose whether or not they can access birth control. We are still fighting these battles that should have been left behind 2 centuries ago. Because patriarchy and because white nationalism, white supremacy is trying to organize to preserve itself. The inclusion revolution is about taking on all of these ancient structures to say never again. We will not return to that. Unfortunately, we've lost a few battles in the United States, particularly around gender issues. But that means that we've got to revive and come back for the battle. because it's never ending.
It's funny when you say that they are uncomfortable, right? Because when we see like Brazil, we have some companies, they are much more going to the diversity and inclusion, which is great. But when you see those companies posts on LinkedIn, like something, oh, this process is going to be 100% for trans people or black people. You go to the comments, you don't see arguments of people. Not that there is, but you see fear, right? You see fear of people not wanting to be, to share a little bit of the place that they have. And it's crazy how they don't see what they were writing, like, because they're saying something like, oh, they're not fighting for equality, they're fighting for, I don't know, they want to have more right than us. But when you see the majority of the company, when you see collaborators, you only see white people. So there's no equality here. We're fighting for at least 50-50.
And they don't want it.
Yeah, they don't want it.
They don't want it. Because that means that so just to give you a short history lesson, they have historically benefited from historical affirmative action, where they have been able to organize every element of society to their advantage, meaning that whether, they were qualified or not, they rose to the top because the systems were organized. The educational system was organized, the employment sector, the labor market systems were organized. All of these systems were organized to ensure that they got the permanent advantage. It was true of males. It is true of white people. White supremacy plus male supremacy has equaled how society has been organized in the past. Now, with the inclusion revolution, we see people who recognize that this is not right, and it's not fair, and it's not, by the way, good for our society. We should have a society that is for all people. And so those who have been privileged in the past are now scared because all of the systems that they had carefully built in order to exclude everybody else are coming down. And now they're wondering, will this mean that we won't have, economic privilege? Will this mean that, our racial or gender privilege will no longer matter? And they're scared because they want the system to be the way it's been for centuries. And we're saying, no, the system should be for everyone. Now, let me just say this in closing. And that is that these fights, these are real battles. And they want to close off the opportunities before they've even begun. So, for example, in the United States of America, I am, who I am in some respects because of two major public policies. One was my dad was Air Force. He was in the military. In 1949, they integrated the military so that I was able to be the first generation in my family to go to schools that weren't segregated by color. That meant that the quality of education that a white kid was getting was the quality of education I was getting. Not only that, but I sat in classrooms with white kids, and I could compare my talents and abilities with theirs. And I knew that I was comparable, if not better. And that's shocking to some people because in their minds, they have been taught that, that the reason why Black and brown people are at the bottom, or the reason why women are at the bottom, is because they just don't have it. They just don't have the capabilities and the abilities. So in their minds, they're superior because that's what they've been taught. And everything around them has affirmed that belief because they've only seen Black and brown and women people in a subservient and an excluded role. It's the biggest shock of their lives to learn that, lo and behold, once you can get a proper education that's of high quality, once you can get exposed to networks of opportunity, people can compete toe-to-toe on the same level. And sometimes they can even be better than you. That's a shock. It's shocking to their conscience, and it's a threat to their identity. And so, we have to understand that there are some people that are going to, react with fear, and they're going to organize to try to stop it because they're fearful about what it means for them, and they're fearful about the core of their beliefs and their identity. And so we have to find ways in order to overcome that, because this is about moving into a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and where our countries can be the best that they can be.
Tom?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I could stay here the whole morning, but I think you have a plane to catch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. I deeply appreciate you.
Right, good.